Hi and welcome to the Mike's DIY Tips channel on YouTube. I'm Mike, and in this video I'd like to show you how to use woodworking planes. There are many sorts available, but I've always used an ordinary smoothing plane and block plane, and I find those adequate for most jobs, especially when you consider that these days you can buy timber already planed. The advantage of that is that you can go into the supplier and select the pieces that you want to buy and reject the ones with big knots or other little imperfections. The three main reasons for using the plane on wood is to smooth the surface if it's a bit rough, or you've just sawn a piece off and you want to get rid of the sawn effect, or in case it is slightly curved and you want to straighten it out, and the other reason is you want to reduce the thickness or the width to get down to a special size to suit your project. Also, you may need to take the corner off with a chamfer or a bevel, or you might want to put a round edge on, which you can do with the plane, and I'll show you how to do it. Before proceeding further, the question of sharpening and setting up respective planes is dealt with in a separate video called Keeping Woodwork and Garden Tools Sharp, and there will be an icon at the end of this video for you to click in order to watch that video if you would like. So why would I want to use that plane as against this plane and vice versa? This is called a block plane. The blade is at a very shallow angle and it's intended for very delicate work where you want to just take off a little sliver of wood, or if you're doing corners. And also end grain, which we'll come on to again later. This one is more of a general purpose. This one will do what that one will do, not necessarily quite as well, but this is a good general purpose one. And in this case, this little brass wheel here, turn it clockwise to give you more blade and therefore more cut. Turn it anti-clockwise, not very far, just a part of a turn, to bring the blade back and not try and cut so much wood. This one, the adjustment is slightly different. The wheel is flat instead of upright, but it's the same. Clockwise for more blade and anti-clockwise for less blade or less cutting. In both cases they've got a screw here which is adjustable so that you just get the blade locked in enough to stop it moving about when you're actually using it, but still allow the adjustment screw to work. If you tighten that up too much with a screwdriver, you'll find that it'll be almost impossible to turn the adjustment wheel. This plane can be used with two hands like that, which is great for stability and extra strength on the push, or you can use it with one hand. When you're ready to use the plane, make sure that the cutting edge of the blade is running parallel to the side of the slot that it pokes through. If it's not, you can adjust it one way or the other. It sort of tilts the end of the blade by moving this lever here. But note this, if you move the lever to the right, the blade cuts more on the left. If you move it to the left like that, the blade will cut more on the right. Normally you would have this lever centralised so that the blade cuts evenly on the left and the right side. Now the same principle applies to this little block plane, with the exception that in this case if you move the lever to the right it cuts more on the right, move it to the left and the blade will cut more on the left, and normally you keep it in a central position. When you need to plane a piece of wood, you need to stop it from moving while you run the plane over the surface. And you can do that several ways. For example, if you just want to take a bit off the edge, we can stand up and push the edge against the wall. if you're taking off a more serious amount of wood, and especially if you want to plane the face, then you need something like this clamped to the bench. This is a piece of plywood clamped to the bench. An alternative trick is to have two countersunk wood screws screwed into the bench but left with the heads protruding, so that the piece of wood can butt up there, but the screws are well below the surface of the wood so that it won't damage the blade of the plane as it shoots over the end. You can manage with one screw, but the wider the piece of wood, the more I would suggest considering two screws. The downside of this is that the edge of the screw head will put a little mark on the wood, so if you don't mind that, this is a good way of doing it. Now another way is to have a bench stop like that. This is a homemade one, but it really works. It's got a stepped bottom, and across the width underneath is a piece of plywood which stops it dropping right through, and according to where the step is. So that's another way of stopping the wood from sliding. Another way, of course, is the vice. If you've got one, obviously that's to be preferred, because if you grip it properly, you can use both hands on the plane and just control it nice and steadily. You can use it this way, but you just got to be a bit careful to control what you're doing. When planing an edge and you've got to use your spare hand to steady the wood, it means you've only got one arm pushing the plane. So don't try and set the plane to cut too deeply, because it won't work. You need to be able to push the plane with just your one arm so that you get a nice continuous smooth cut if possible. When you lay it flat like that, you can use two hands and set the blade so that it only cuts a little bit until you get the feel of how much strength is required and how successful you are continuously planing. So that needs to be set a little bit more to cut a bit deeper. That's probably enough now. So just carry on until we get a nice continuous shaving like that. Now certain types of wood allow you to plane either way. This particular one is being a bit awkward because just there and there it doesn't like me planing in the one direction. So let's try it in the opposite direction. That's much better. So where necessary, you have to turn the piece of wood round to deal with an awkward piece of grain. Now, because of the width of the blade compared with the width of the timber, you will still end up with slightly rough and very slightly uneven parts. So if it's important for you to have a very smooth surface finish, you need to finish off with sandpaper. Then if by any chance you're going to do a painted finish, you should get a beautiful, flat, clean surface. This is one of my sanding boards, and there's a video showing how to make these as well, called Making Your Own Sanding Boards. One more thing to show you, and that is, if you've got to plane this down to an exact width, you need to mark a line. One way of doing it is to get a ruler, and this finger acts as a stop to position the ruler exactly where you want it so that you can draw a line. Another way is to use a marking gauge which has a metal spike sticking out there and a sliding shoulder here, and you set it to where you want to plane down to, and then you use it to put effectively a little groove in the wood. It's a bit fiddly and you need to keep this at 90 degrees, but then when you've done that, and you can do it both sides, when you plane down and get to that groove, it will be obvious from here. The groove will suddenly appear, and that's a good way of getting a uniform width. Any time that you want to check the straightness of a piece of wood, just offer it up to the eye like this. So this eye is looking down the top and the side face as well, and I can see that this is pretty well straight with the exception of just a little bit of a bump there. Particularly important to check the straightness of wood when you're proposing to buy it. You don't want to buy curved pieces of wood. So if the centre of the hump is there, just plane a little bit and slowly increase the distance that you're planing, so that you're getting to a point where the whole thing is going to be straight, and keep on checking it with your eye. And of course maintain the square corner. If by any chance it's hollow in the middle and curling up at the end slightly, what you do, you deal with each end separately and just plane a little bit and slowly increase, and then likewise at the other end, slowly increase the amount that you're planing and keep on checking with the eye. With a bit of luck, you will be able to get it straight. Now let's look at using the plane to smooth end grain. The problem with smoothing end grain is that when the plane blade comes to the very edge there, it's very likely to flick off the surface of this edge. So you've got to use a lot of care. You definitely need a very sharp blade in the plane. Make sure it's set, as I said before, with the cutting edge parallel to the edge of the slit, and just go in short strokes, like short easy strokes, so that we're only taking off dust. I know it's slow, but this is the way to do it without splitting. Turn it round, so we did from that edge into about there. Now we're going to go from here into about there. And all the time you need to keep the plane at 90 degrees to this face here, so that you get a nice 90-degree angle. You need to constantly check with a set square. If you're experienced, you can do that by eye. So far I've shown you using that plane. Now with the block plane, you get a nicer cut, and again we're only taking off dust, we're not trying to take off big lumps. And again, turn it round so that the cutting blade doesn't go near that edge. If it does, you're likely to split that off, in which case you've got to put up with it or go to the trouble of gluing it back on again and waiting for the glue to dry. Another way of planing the end of a piece of wood is to use your bench hook, which you would normally use for sawing. So we put the piece of wood on top of that, and whatever thickness this is, you need something the other end to support the piece of wood to match. Make sure that your plane blade is set parallel to the slit in the base plate, because that will give you a definite 90-degree cut, and again just with nice gentle short strokes like that, not going near the end to split off this end piece here, and turn it over. When planing the edge of a piece of wood or the end grain, if when you check it with a set square you find that you're sloping off one way or the other, don't forget the lever here on your plane which tilts the blade, so that if this side is high and that side is low because we've accidentally planed it on a slope, move the lever so that the plane will cut more on the left side than the right to correct the slope of the edge, and the same with the end grain. Now let's look at beveling and chamfering. The two terms get confused. This would be a chamfer, where we go so far down the one face and come back to the corner here. Now a bevel, on the other hand, only goes so far along that edge, and it goes the same distance along there as it does down there, so you get a line at roughly 45 degrees, and it means you still have some shoulder there and then a slope and then the rest of the face there. So what you do, you tilt your plane at roughly 45 degrees because that's the angle you're going for, and you start planing, and we can turn up this adjustment screw to take some more material off. So I'm nearly down to my destination at the end. So that's a bevel, and what you do what I've just done all the way along uniformly, with lines drawn all the way along the wood. Now you do a similar thing for the chamfer, but again, tilting the blade, we could put ourselves some guidelines there to give us a rough guide of how we're doing. Now I'm taking off shavings which are quite thick. When you get towards the end and you want to adjust it and get it just exactly right, you can ease off the adjustment on the blade so that you're not taking such a thick shaving at every stroke. Now, if this is a one-off piece of wood and you just want a bit of a chamfer or a bevel on it, then you can do it by eye without the pencil lines. But if you're trying to match up the exact profile of another piece of wood, then you need to carefully mark out with your lines. Now let's look at doing a round edge. Again, you can use some guidelines to give yourself a clue as to how you're doing, not taking too much off there compared with there, and I would just do it like this, moving the piece of wood, tilting it left and right so that I'm not taking off effectively a bevel, I'm just taking off a layer of wood. I can do it in the vise, but I've just got to keep angling the plane instead of angling the timber. Constantly changing the angle of the plane. Now, yes, I can feel little flats where I've planed in different positions, but as you can hopefully see there, we're starting to get a nice round edge, and if you wanted a bigger round, you just keep going and doing what I've just been doing. And then finally, to finish off, finish it off with sandpaper, and then you've got a nice round edge ready for painting or whatever. Now, boards. Chipboard I'll deal with first, because chipboard is quite rough and hard on the plain blade. You will have to resharpen your blade when you're planing down chipboard. Nevertheless, it's doable. And again, I would recommend starting from each end, don't run the plane right off, because there's a good chance that you'll flick out some of the core material. Plywood planes up quite nicely, especially the higher quality plywoods, but again, if you remember when we were doing end grain, I said don't run the plane off the end because it's likely to flick off the end surface. The same sort of thing happens with plywood, because plywood is made up of different layers and each layer runs in a different direction. So whichever way you're planing at a corner, you're always in danger of flicking some of the grain out. So I recommend that you always plane plywood in from the corner and not out to the corner like that, because you'll flick off. So there you are then. I hope that's given you some good pointers and tips on planing wood. If you like my videos, you can subscribe to my channel in order to get automatic notification of the next new video launched. Just click on the circular icon appearing on the left now. Otherwise, you can watch some of my other videos by clicking on one of the rectangular icons appearing now, including the one about sharpening woodwork and garden blades. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope we'll see you again very soon.